Well, good morning and welcome once more to Elevenses with Kevin Williams of Survival Skills Rider Training. It's Sunday. It's the show number 173. It's the 3rd of October, so we're well into the autumn months now. Got a fairly packed show again for you this morning. In the news, fuel crisis, if you haven't noticed, has hit blood bikers. The RAC, rather surprisingly, have announced their support for dynamic lanes on smart motorways, and I'll explain what that means in just a moment. And Aussie Bike Magazine has debunked a 42% increase in fatal bike crash claim. Avoiding clickbait safety articles, we'll look at one of the worst I've seen for a long time. Zero S becomes the first electric vehicle to circumnavigate the UK, all for under £20. Police are giving away free bike locks in Thanet, and we'll also take a look at the Hiplock D1000, which is claimed to be a angle grinder resistant bike lock. And then finally, we'll finish off with today's better biking point, as it's fairly topical weather-wise. We'll look at aquaplaning, what it is, and why or whether we need to worry about it. So settle yourself down for the next 20 minutes or so whilst I run through the news stories before we get to the better biking tip at the end of the show. Before we go anywhere else, don't forget we have the Science of Being Seen presentation. I have been pushing this for the last few weeks, but if you have missed it, then now would be a good time to book up. I still have a few seats available for the last or for the next show. I'm running these every couple of months, at least for the time being. Here are some comments on the last one I delivered 2 months ago, plus the link to book it up for yourself. It's Wednesday, 6th of October, and it's at 8 p.m. UK time. So if you're interested and you haven't found out about Science of Being Seen before, do pop over, have a look at what I'm doing, and maybe think about sitting in on the talk in a few days' time. Now, unless you've been hiding under a rock for the last week plus and not riding a bike, you'll probably know we have something of a petrol shortage at the pump. And the problem does appear to be variable, depends where you live. Brian Maddison, who's the chairman of the Petrol Retailers Association, said it remains a really big problem in some areas. In London and the southeast, and possibly parts of eastern England, if anything, it has got worse. That was what he said yesterday. Well, certainly my experience seems to confirm that. I took out yesterday morning to tour 6 local petrol stations at 7 a.m. because I needed fuel in the bike for a course that I'm running in Oxford tomorrow, and not one of them had fuel. There were reports that one of those petrol stations did get a delivery in the afternoon, but the queue was so long it was causing traffic chaos half a mile away. I've managed to scavenge enough out of my backup bike, so I do have a tank full, which should get me to Oxford and back tomorrow if I take it easy up the motorway. But frankly, unless I can refuel while I'm out, that's it for my on-road training until the petrol situation eases around here in London. And just to make our day, Mr. Maddison also warned us to expect anything from a 1p to a 3p per litre increase at the petrol pump, and he said that's not profiteering, it's genuine wholesale price increases caused by global factors, which is interesting. That always seems to happen when there's a petrol shortage. But it's not obviously not just affecting people like myself. The blood biker charity Serve, who deliver life-saving medical products to and for the NHS, have also been hit by the fuel crisis. Their riders, who are mainly responsible for out-of-hours deliveries when NHS blood and transfusion service isn't running, they transport anything from blood platelets to plasma and urgent samples that are needed to be analysed. I was a Serve rider myself for several years back in the mid-90s. In a report that was in the I newspaper, Chris Butler, who's the chairman of the Serve Surrey in London charity, said they've been forced to cut back on their activities since some volunteers have been unable to get fuel and have had to give up their shifts. Serve Kent earlier this week said that up to half their blood bikers had been unable to get out due to a lack of fuel. And the other area that it's hit Serve with is volunteer events where they raise funds for the service. They've been unable to get people out to these events because they haven't had fuel. So a network of similar charities operates across a lot of the UK, and they deliver around 2% of the blood products used by hospitals. So not a huge proportion, but even so, the shortfall will be noticed. And as I said, it does run at times when the regular service is out of action. So they're often delivering emergency product. So obviously concern there for Serve. Now, in another story, I was rather surprised to see that the RAC are saying that all lane running on smart motorways should be abandoned in favour of operating the dynamic hard shoulder. Now, you'll probably recall that the dynamic hard shoulder isn't open 24/7, but it only opens to traffic during busy hours. Now, the RAC believe that this will provide the increased capacity when it's actually needed, but will still allow drivers to pull over during quieter periods. According to polls, only 1/4 of drivers actually support smart motorways with permanent running lanes and no hard shoulder. And the RSC's head of roads policy, Nicholas Lies, says it seems the only thing that will truly satisfy most drivers is the reinstatement of the hard shoulder. But I have to say, I'm slightly baffled by his argument that opening up the hard shoulder to running traffic when the traffic is actually at its busiest would increase capacity. Well, yes, it certainly would do that, but without adversely compromising safety. Well, I cannot see how that would be. I struggle with that argument. And then basically he says that all would be needed is to repaint the solid white line plus some additional gantry signs. He said they'd also like to see the red X illuminated whenever the hard shoulder is not used as a running lane. Alongside messages saying the hard shoulder is for emergency use only, so drivers clearly know when it's not in use. That way, he says, there'll be no confusion, and anyone who has to stop due to a breakdown or an incident is likely to be better protected. But I thought the whole point that the dynamic hard shoulders were abandoned a couple of years ago was because of this confusion as to whether they were open or not, and the added risk that drivers have to make a forced lane change when one closes. That happened to me up around Birmingham. I was in the middle of driving along the hard shoulder because it was open, and then suddenly it wasn't. So I had to get off the hard shoulder and out onto a normal running lane. The reason I was in that lane in the first place was because I knew I was taking the next exit, so I'd already made the move over to the left-hand lane. But a lot of people didn't move out of the lane, even though it was now closed. So then I had to merge back into the left lane to get off the motorway. So it's easy to say something like read the signs, but it really does take only just one missed observation to put ourselves and others at risk. And I found the stretch around Birmingham where the dynamic lanes were in operation, and they seemingly opened and closed at fairly random intervals too. So I found them very, very confusing indeed. There is no ambiguity with an always closed hard shoulder or an always open running lane. So what's the Department of Transport's take? Well, they're still in favour of smart motorways. They show that fatalities, their data, they say, show that fatalities are less likely on smart motorways than conventional ones. But I think that claim needs treating with some caution because it seems to be based on the comparative fatality rates for 2015 to 2017 and not for the most recent data, which is 2018 and 2019, which show smart motorways to have higher fatality rates. That may not be unconnected with the rapidly increased rollout onto some of the busier motorways, particularly here in the southeast. So far more useful, I think, would be before and after figures, duly adjusted for traffic flow and possibly for traffic speeds too. And a better measure than the usual KSI figures might be near misses. Now, Panorama, I'm sometimes dubious about their research too when it comes to road safety, claimed a 20-fold increase in near misses on one stretch of the M25 that was converted to all-lane running. So, okay, don't forget you're watching Survival Skills Rider Training here. I'm Kevin Williams, and this is my Elevenses show. If you've got any comments or questions, do drop me a line. I'm always happy to see what people have to say. And don't forget, the show goes out every Wednesday and Sunday at 11. Usually goes out live. Very occasionally I have to do a recorded show, but normally it's a live show. So it gives you the latest information and latest news. All right, so, okay. The UK, of course, isn't the only country where numbers get a bit of a massage for road safety purposes. And I came across an interesting story from Australia just the other day. Their motorcycle news website was talking about how they get a lot of requests to place sponsored articles, or better described as an advert, basically. The only difference is basically that the sponsored article focuses on generating search engine links. And I get them myself from time to time. So obviously my own Facebook page can't be doing too badly. Anyway, to cut to the chase, I was interested to hear that the highest cash incentives tend to come from law firms, which may give us a hint about why legal services cost so much. Anyway, the thrust of the article was a clickbait headline: motorcyclist fatalities up 42% year on year, highest rate in 10 plus years. And the article then used a lot of figures and data to show that their claim was correct. So anyway, the magazine basically wanted to see how this law firm had actually come up with these figures. The law firm said they had analysed road transport crash fatality data as reported by the police, and they had compared the first half of 2021 with trends over a 10-year period from 2011 to 2021. So the magazine got hold of the Australian Motorcycle Council chairman, Sean Leonard, to interpret the data to see where they got this 42% year-on-year rise from. And it turns out that you can claim that deaths rose 42% if you looked at a very narrow subset of that data. So in fact, the crash rate for the first 6 months of 2021, 132 deaths, is 42% higher than the first 6 months of 2020, when it was 93 deaths. But it's a very selective set of figures. And of course, as always, when you look at a selective set of figures, it can and often does give a very skewed impression of what's actually happening over a longer baseline. So in this case, what they did was they calculated fatality rates against registration data. And when you do that, you get exactly the opposite. You actually get a significant improvement. Between 2010 and 2020, for example, the period of 10 years, the powered two-wheeler numbers actually increased by a third on the road, but the death rate for riders actually went down from 3.4 per 10,000 registrations in 2010 to 2.2 by the end of 2020. So that is a very, very significant decrease, around about 35%. So obviously the data there was skewed together with a clickbait headline, but unfortunately it's not just headline grabbing law companies who play this selective data trick. It's also used in the UK by the police and road safety bodies. So fundamentally, anytime you see anything in the news that says motorcycle casualties up by X% since last year, be suspicious of what you're seeing. And it can be used the other way too. It's not unknown for a down by X% report to surface claiming that a road safety intervention has worked. I remember a Thames Valley campaign that supposedly reduced motorcycle casualties in the area spectacularly one summer. Next year, of course, despite the campaign running for the second year, numbers were up again, back to where they had been the year before. So it's basically called regression to the mean, and the low numbers, in fact, almost certainly coincided with a very wet summer. So as the magazine says, and I can certainly agree with this, there is still more to be done to tackle bike crashes, but no one benefits from misrepresenting the data, except for the people who actually generate the report to garner attention for themselves. So don't click on it, is my statement. But talking of poor advice, how about this? This is from an article purporting to offer 7 maintenance tips all riders need to know. Now, I should hang my head in shame here because I knew damn well it was clickbait, but I clicked on it anyway, just in case I got to discover anything new. Most of it was actually so vague as to be completely meaningless, but then I got to this. Now, listen carefully. This is all about brakes, and what you should know apparently is that brakes are extremely important for safety purposes. Poorly maintained brakes can be fatal for you. They should be properly spaced when holding the tyre. Being too tight or too loose will lead to improper functioning and can cause accidents. Eh? What on earth is all that about? Properly spaced when holding the tyre? Are we talking about bicycle uh, brakes on the rim brakes or what? I have no idea. Certainly bears little resemblance to any brake I've ever used on a motorcycle. We're told then you can adjust the tightness based on your personal preferences, but make sure that it isn't something that can be dangerous. Now, even if there were any kind of factual accuracy there, just how are you measuring this tightness? I have absolutely no idea. And then this is the pièce de résistance. This bit really got me. I don't know. I didn't know whether to laugh or cry. Regularly grease the brakes so that they function smoothly. You gods. Quite frankly, there ought to be some kind of internet nuke button so that you can press so that complete rubbish like this can be buried forever. Right, okay. So don't forget, if you are enjoying the show, you can contribute over on my Coffee page. And if you do so, you open up a back catalogue of hundreds of articles that I've written over the years, which aren't complete gibberish, but are written from a lot of personal riding experience. And there are plenty of bike maintenance tips over there too. So if you're interested in some decent advice, do pop over to my Coffee page at Survival Skills there. Right, okay, so as you probably gathered over the last 18 months or so while I've been running Elevenses, I'm a bit of a fan of electric motorcycles. And it seems, quite frankly, that the electric motorcycle will be even more attractive right now, sitting in the petrol desert here in London. So I was quite excited to see that a former motorcycle racer, a chap called Kurt Langen, had just ridden round the UK on a Zero S. It took him 21 days to do the full 5,000 plus mile journey, and he travelled clockwise around the country, starting from the Humber Bridge, and he did around 250 miles a day, and that was mostly on B roads and unclassified roads, and his only hitch with the bike was a puncture in South Wales. And here's the kicker: he spent £18.69 to power the bike. I did a quick calculation. I would have needed about 500 gallons of fuel to do the same journey. You can work out the price of that yourself. Okay, so what is Zero S? Well, it's one of these. He says, desperately trying to get the picture to come up on screen. Let's try the click. No, that's not the right one. I seem to have lost the picture. Where is it? Oh, there it is. Right, sorry about that. Moment's delay while I get that sorted out. There it is. That's the Zero S. It's the 125 equivalent motorcycle in the Zero range. It's an 11 kilowatt bike, so it can be ridden on CBT and L plates once you're 17. The bike can be recharged in around 2 hours from a 7 kilowatt charging point, or overnight from a standard 3-pin socket. And Langen said at the end of this mega run, he said, the charging infrastructure is actually definitely there. Chargers are in out of the way places, but in most towns you have 2 or 3 places to charge. And a few times I found brand new posts which had just been put in and weren't even on the apps. He said, I found the Tesco chargers run by PodPoint to be the best. They were easy to find, reliable, and completely free to use. In my whole trip, I only found one charger that was out of order, and even then there was a working one right next to it. He said that he was getting between 120 and 130 miles between recharges. Although, interestingly, he said that one day he saw 160 miles in Cornwall, and he put that down to battery regeneration, which he was able to get going down hills. I suspect it might have been more to do with a tailwind, actually, because if you think about it, you have to use energy to climb the hill in the first place. And the basic rules of physics mean you won't get more out of the descent than you put in to go up it on the other side. Anyway, Dale Robinson, Zero's UK manager, he said, we're really proud of Kurt's achievement and believe he's the first person to circumnavigate the island with an electric vehicle of any kind. The purpose was to show that not only are our electric motorcycles capable of racking up the miles, but it's incredibly easy too. Kurt spent a couple of weeks living with the bike before undertaking the journey and quickly adapted to EV best practices. He was able to take advantage of free charging at supermarkets and at his overnight stops, where he was able to plug into a regular wall socket. And amazingly, the total cost of electricity he had to pay for was just $18.69. So another one there in favour of electric motorcycles. Now, in the last show, you may remember that I was arguing that motorcycle manufacturers don't do enough to combat bike and scooter theft, which means it's back to the owner to take measures. Well, if you're in Kent and you're short of some security, you can pick up a free bike lock as part of a crime prevention event in Ramsgate later this month. It's organised by the Thanet Community Safety Partnership as part of the Safer Streets Lock It or Lose It campaign, aimed at supporting local riders. If you head down to the Harbour Parade on Saturday the 23rd at 11 a.m, then you can meet officers from Kent Police's community policing team. And they will have a limited number of heavy-duty locking bike chains available for local residents who have a bike registered in their name. Presumably you'll have to prove you haven't travelled from the Outer Hebrides just to get a free lock. Sean Scarsbrook, who's the sergeant from the community policing team, said, historically, a lot of motorcycle thefts reported in the district relate specifically to mopeds and 125 off-road bikes, so the free locks will be prioritised for anyone who attends the event and can prove they live locally and own such a bike. Yes, so you will need proof. And that brings me neatly to the final news story of the day. And that's the Kickstarter launch of the Hiplock D1000 anti-angle grinder bike lock. Now, one of the tools regularly used to destroy security locks on bikes and cycles alike is a portable angle grinder. They'll go through the cheaper bike locks like cheese, and they will even go through the more expensive hardened and toughened locks and chains without too much ado. But Hiplock claim they have a solution. It's their D1000. Now, Hiplock was created in 2011 when they created what they called the original wearable bike lock. Now, that's a bit of a dubious claim since motorcyclists have been slinging chains over their shoulders or around their waists since back in the 1980s at least. But by 2017, they'd followed that up with another product, their Airlock, which is actually a wall-mounted high-security hanger for a push bike, which they claim is another unique product. So what's so special about the D1000? Well, the initial press release claimed the D1000 was angle grinder proof. But that was quickly modified to say it's a lightweight mobile lock that can withstand severe sustained angle grinder attack. I've got a picture of this somewhere as well, so let me find it for you. There it is. Let me pop it up on screen. So there we go. There we have the lock itself, and that's one of their publicity photos, and it's all apparently in the composition of the lock. According to the press release, they've used a material called ferrosafe, which is said to be a composite graphene material that effectively resists high-power angle grinders due to its unique chemical and physical properties. So chemical properties sounded a little bit dubious, but anyway, I did a bit of digging, and ferrosafe turns out to be what's a weldable ceramic composite material which effectively resists high power angle grinders and drills at lower thicknesses and weights than is possible with conventional materials. So, in other words, you can attack it, but it's harder work. And it turns out the material's already been used for safe and other security sort of boxes, that kind of thing. Now, ferrosafe apparently gains these properties through the incorporation of something called graphene. Now, that's a carbon lattice, so it's not entirely related to diamond, but like diamond is pure carbon, graphene is pure carbon too, but in this case it's just one layer thick. Now, graphene is very strong, but it can be, as I understand it, shattered, which is presumably why under the ceramic composite with the graphene in it, there is a more conventional square profile hardened steel core. And that is said to produce or give protection against traditional attack methods such as bolt croppers. So cutting through, as it were, several dozen paragraphs of rather glowing self-promotion in the press release, does it work? Well, Hiplock obviously say it does, and they've submitted it to the Sold Secure test. They've got a bicycle diamond and a motorcycle diamond award for this product. And they say you can have the utmost confidence, therefore, that everything we claim has been independently verified by an internationally recognized security accreditation organization. Now, there are those who would question the Sold Secure standard. If you search out Captain Cropper on YouTube, you'll find he took bolt croppers to several Sold Secure rated products and destroyed them in seconds. So how resistant to attack actually is it? Well, over to a real world independent test. The lock was given by Hiplock to Cycling Weekly, and security obviously being a cyclist concern as well as a motorcycle concern. And they actually destruction tested one, but it wasn't easy. They used a mains grinder, which are more powerful than portable units, and it actually took them 5 complete discs to cut through the lock, and that was in just one place. And it took them 20 minutes. Now, the dual locking mechanism on this lock means that if you're going to get it off something like a wheel, you would have to actually cut the lock in 2 places. So you would actually need to do this twice to remove the lock completely. Not only this, the magazine reported, but the process created plumes of smoke, dust and sparks, which would no doubt draw attention from the public, or not, as we've seen in recent videos. So how much is this actually going to set you back? Well, the early bird price of £150 on Kickstarter is already sold out. There was still some 20% off £200 locks last time I looked. But the full retail price will be fairly whopping £250. But that will be almost certainly less than your insurance premium will shoot up if you have to make a theft claim. So if the lock is resistant to picking 2, it could be a good buy. I'll be looking out for an item by the lock picking lawyer to see if he tests it, and if he does, I'll let you know. If you want to know more about this product, I will put the link up for you, and you can go over and have a look at it. Here it comes. It will be up any second now. Right, okay, so that brings us to the end of today's news items. There's the Kickstarter link gone up. Onto the final bit, which is our better biking tip. Well, today's is on riding on wet surfaces with one specific issue. You probably noticed if you were in the southeast that the rain was pretty biblical yesterday. I think it started about 11 o'clock in the morning, just about the time I was actually siphoning some fuel out the bike, and it stopped fairly late at night. More rain is forecast for midweek in different parts of the country as we get the tail end of Hurricane Sam heading this way. So a Met Office warning for heavy rain has been issued. So I thought it might be a good time to talk about aquaplaning. What is it? How do we recognize it? What do we do about it? The problem arises when the rainfall is too heavy for drains to cope. And then what happens is standing water appears on the road. Now, when the water gets sufficiently deep and speeds of motorcycles are sufficiently high, that is when the problem seems to arise. And what appears to happen is that the front tyre simply can't displace water away to the sides as you ride through it. Instead of that, what happens is the tyre starts pushing water ahead of it. And when it does that, a sort of wave forms in front of the tyre, and then the tyre rides up onto the crest of the wave. So it floats on top of that wave and it loses contact with the road surface. And of course, you get no grip. And as near enough, it's the same principle that Seacat ferries exploit. Now, the problem's most common with car tyres because what they obviously are is a sort of broad barrel shape, and that means they have a long, thin profile, and so there's plenty of water being pushed in front, ready to build up. And of course, that's why car tyres have lots of grooves cut in them. It's to track this water away, and it's why the tread is relatively deep too. Now, for motorcycles, though, we have a rather different shape of tyre. The contact patch is V-shaped rather than being rounded, or it's slightly U-shaped. And basically what it does is it tends to push water to either side, rather like the bow of a ship. So different shape of contact patch, we don't get anything like as much of a problem with aquaplaning as cars do. I lost count of how many times my van aquaplaned while I was pounding up and down motorways doing parcel deliveries. But on the bike, I've only actually aquaplaned twice in all time I've been riding. I can still remember both instances quite clearly. The first time was in Belgium. I was actually coming down a hill in the Ardennes near Bastogne, and the road is super elevated on that particular stretch. So what that means is rather than being crown camber where the road is higher in the middle than it is at the edges, the entire road actually slopes. And as you go around bends, the slope changes to match. And the idea is that you get grip on the road, whichever direction you're going. Unfortunately, it also had the effect on this particular stretch of road of capturing the rainwater that was flowing down the hill quite effectively. So it was rather like a sort of twisty water slide, and the water just got channeled down the road. So halfway down, the water had got deep enough that my speed was sufficient on that descent to cause the bike to aquaplane. The second time it happened was actually rather closer to home. It was in West Kingsdown, which, if you know Brands Hatch, it's the village just up the road from the racetrack. And that's one of the old concrete roads, which, and of course, concrete has to be laid perfectly flat. If it doesn't, it just flows out of off the road. So the road is pretty wide. It's quite flat for quite a long area. And what had happened was, in a very slight depression in the road surface, some standing water had accumulated over about 40 or 50 meters. Now, I hit it at about 50 miles an hour. And once again, the bike aquaplaned. So that's my take on it. The danger appears to be when the road surface is just awash, but for a considerable distance, and we hit it at speed. So you're unlikely to aquaplane if you just ride through a puddle, because that bow wave hasn't got time to build up in front of the wheel. You're unlikely to aquaplane into deep standing water because you will see it and you will slow down. So it's when the road looks very wet, but not obviously flooded. So look out for sheets of water on fast roads. The best clue that I've seen that you're headed for standing water that is deep enough to aquaplane in is a sudden increase in the spray kicked up by the vehicles ahead. So what happens when you do aquaplane? Well, the big clue is that the bars suddenly go all light and floaty in your hands. And what happened on both occasions is my bars actually started wiggling slightly from side to side, even though the bike was still going in a straight line. So very different from a speed wobble where the entire machine shimmies. This is the bars moving, even though the bike's carrying on in a straight line. So it's a little bit like riding on ice, but one important difference. The back wheel continues to drive the machine forward. On ice, very often the first warning that you are on ice is wheel spin as the back wheel lets go. So how did I cope? Well, the answer is to do what you should do on any tricky riding situation, is get into what I call the brace position. That's where your knees are locked into the petrol tank, so that you're taking the sort of you're locked against the bike, and everything up above that from sort of top half of the spine, shoulders, and most importantly arms are loose. Don't try and hang on to the bars for dear life, because as there's nothing happening with the front wheel against the surface, there's no grip there. Don't try to steer because the bike won't, there's no grip. The trick seems to be simply to roll gently off the throttle. So nice and slowly, just roll the throttle shut. And what that'll do is it will transfer weight back to the front of the machine, and that should be enough to bring the front tire down through that standing wave and back into contact with the road surface. You don't need to do anything else, in my opinion. Some people suggest using a tiny bit of back brake, but again, don't overdo it. If there's not a lot of grip at the front, there's not a lot of grip at the rear either. So once the tire bites tarmac, if it's not actually directly in line with the bike's travel, and as I said, the bars do tend to move from side to side, there might be a bit of a shimmy now as the tires starts gripping again. So again, it's important to have those loose arms and you're not hanging onto the bars, so you can just absorb that movement and let the bike sort itself out. Hanging onto the bars for dear life always makes anything worse in terms of bike handling. But most importantly, if you are aquaplaning, don't grab a handful of front brake. If there's nothing for the tire to grip to because it's floating on a wave of water, then it'll simply stop going round. And then when the tire does cut back through the water, you have a locked front wheel. That is an accident waiting to happen. So yeah, the takeaways from this: aquaplaning is rare, but look out for thin sheets of standing water. Watch out for that sudden spray. Reduce speed before hitting it. And if you do detect that looseness at the front that indicates that the bike's probably aquaplaning, the brace position is the thing to do, and the front brake is the thing to avoid. And don't forget, you can't see potholes or other road damage whilst they're underwater either. That's pretty much it for today. If you do have fuel to go riding, go out there and enjoy yourselves, but be safe. I'll be back with another Elevenses on Wednesday, but that's it for me for today. So thanks for looking in. Do like, comment, share, and hopefully see you on the next show.